from the All Indiana Podcast Network.
It's time for real conversation about the real issues that affect our communities.
Poverty, education, equality, and more.
This is Real Talk.
Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network, and I am Reverend Charles Harrison. And on today's episode, I will have Rick Snyder, president of the local F.O.P. 86, and we will talk about a variety of things dealing from policing and the defund the police movement, and what's going on in Indianapolis with crime and violence in 2023 as we ended the month of April with 80 homicides, only one homicide behind the record-breaking number that we had of 81 in 2021 when the city ended the year with 271 homicides. Hello, this is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison, and normally I have my co-host with me, Reverend Terry Webster Sr., but he's not with me today, and I am so honored to have with me a good friend and a special guest on this podcast. He's been here a number of times since we have started this podcast. He is none other than Rick Snyder, the president of the F.O.P. 86 here locally in Indianapolis. And we certainly talk a lot about policing. We talk a lot about crime and violence in the city. We have somewhat been controversial sometimes in how outspoken we have been, particularly when it comes to the broken judicial system here in Indianapolis, and sometimes the strategy, in the city to reduce the violence. And certainly I think we were ahead of everyone else in the city when in 2019, in the fall of 2019, we kind of predicted that we were going to see a surge in violence that we did the following year. And it was the first of 3 consecutive years that the city reached 200 plus homicides a year. And certainly, we're on pace to do that for the 4th year in a row. Welcome, Rick.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And let's kind of get into a number of topics. And I kind of shared with you earlier a few things that I would like certainly to talk about. Here in Indianapolis, certainly we ended the year of April with 80 homicides, which was only one homicide less than 2021 when we ended April with 81 homicides. And that year, we ended the year with 271 homicides. So certainly it's not the start of the year that we had hoped for. What's your perspective on kind of where we are, what's going on, and then from the law perspective too, how the rank and file are viewing and looking at things, because a lot of times we don't hear from them. We tend to hear from the politicians or the command staff, but we certainly don't hear from the rank and file, who are the ones out there daily patrolling these neighborhoods.
Yeah, and that's the great privilege that I have, which is to get to provide voice for my fellow officers and everything that they're facing and going through. It's easy for us to forget that it's our women and men in law enforcement who are the other ones beside our residents who are in the neighborhoods 24 hours a day, every day of the year. And they're not just experiencing the devastation that is occurring. They're living it. And they're also risking their lives to confront that. And so I think it's important for us to remember that when we're looking at these issues, we're seeing trends and outcomes that are pointing us to another record level year of violence. And, one of the things I think you said in the opening about being controversial, I've found as of late, standing in the middle of the truth brings controversy.
Right.
But the one thing that I do know, and we have discussed over many years now, which is if we stay focused on the outcomes, you can't get around those.
Right.
And the outcomes tell us the direction that we're going. As you said, 80 homicides in the first 4 months of this year. The only other time I'm aware of numbers like that, as you said, is 2021.
Right.
and that's an all-time record. But it puts us on pace to have a fourth year in a row of over 200 homicides. And these 4 years are the only time in 200 years of the city's history that we've reached those numbers.
Wow.
So, I've started sharing with people. I started calling it 200 and 200. 200 homicides in 200 years. We've reached that level, and there's no signs of it going down.
Wow.
So I think we've got to have some honest discussions about what's going on here. I thought the Chief of Police, Randy Taylor, I think it may have been in the press conference that you guys did just a few short days back. I saw a soundbite where he made this point. The police can't solve your problems.
Right.
Now, that may be a shocker for some folks, but that's not what the police are designed for.
Right.
And two, it also points back to this issue that we're not dealing with problems in terms of instruments like guns and weapons and knives and all these other things. We're not dealing with issues of socioeconomic titles. We're dealing with issues of the heart.
Right.
I've always been quick to say, a lot of times people point to poverty. Obviously, that's a contributor, but it's not a predictor.
Right.
I think it's short-sighted and somewhat not only ill-advised but rude to suggest that just because somebody is suffering from poverty, that somehow they're now going to become a criminal and do bad things.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yes.
And so I think it points us back to these issues that these are issues of the heart.
So 200 years, and now for the last 3 years, we have been at 200 plus homicides. I think it's hard for people sometimes to understand because we rely so much on the police to help fix the problems. But yet the causes of a lot of this gun violence, which you hit on it, the issues of the heart, and what we talk about too is the heart and a lot of the root causes of the violence. Do police officers feel like their role has changed a little bit and that sometimes they feel more like social workers than law enforcement in what they're being asked to do?
Well, I think always in law enforcement, there's an aspect of you're a problem solver.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And every officer, that's why they become an officer, right?
Right.
But a critical component to that is you can't strip them of their primary responsibility. As law enforcement officers, their primary responsibility is to enforce the laws. I always find it, nobody ever seems to say that, let's take basketball, for instance, that the referees should also play the roles of the coaches.
Right.
No one says they should play the referees should play the role of cheerleaders or fans.
Right.
They have a distinct role that they are there to fulfill, and if they don't fulfill that role, the rest of the activities can't exist. Well, that's much the same way in our communities. It's not to say that it's some kind of a game. We're talking about life and death and preservation of quality of life, but the fact remains is that we need women and men who are clearly defined to be in that capacity. It doesn't mean that they have to be distant from us. It doesn't mean that we have to view them as somehow not human and just a uniform. But we do have to recognize that we need to keep them in their roles, because when we try to get our officers to be a jack of all trades and a master of none, we see that we drive the spirit out of the officers. At the same time, we drive the respect out of the community for the officers. And then in conjunction with that, we really start to blur the lines of responsibility and accountability. I'll give you an example. We've talked for many years now, since 2019, about the revolving door of criminal justice.
Right.
Our officers have bared the really the anger of the community for criminal justice outcomes of which they really have little to no effect upon. They're not the judge.
Right.
They're not the jury. They're not the prosecutor. They're not those folks. They are the ones who enforce the law, bring it to the attentions of the courts, and then act as a witness for those proceedings.
Right.
But we have a revolving door that's been created, and people say, well, that's the cops. But here's why. That's the cop's fault, because the cop, the uniformed officer in the neighborhood, remember, they're the only ones there 24 hours a day, and they're the most visible representation of the government and, quite frankly, the failures of the government that our community sees day in and day out.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison, and today's guest is Rick Snyder, president of the F.O.P. 86 here locally in Indianapolis. Rick, let's talk about this. You know, I met you on the streets in Mapleton Fall Creek, I think 20 plus years ago. I'm not trying to give our age away, but something like that. Since the time you entered into policing as an officer with the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, has policing changed? Is it different today than when you started?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Policing is ever evolving.
Okay.
Policing is one of those professions that I think is the most proactive in staying up to date on issues, but also changing with the ebbs and flows and the challenges of the day in the community. But with that, I'm always quick to say to our officers, we also have to get back to basics. And I'll just tell you, Rev, I believe that many in the community want us to do that.
Right.
You know, we went through a time frame. Let's just have real talk.
Okay,
You remember in
okay.
the last few years, we were more focused on getting our officers in uniform, dancing and jumping around in videos on social media,
Right.
so that somehow they could become more relatable to the community, rather than staying focused that the community needs those officers out there to protect them, to serve them, but to also ensure that we separate those who would do evil in the community from those who are trying to live a peaceful life. You see, I think sometimes we get too far to the extreme of trying to be relatable, that we start to make the role of the officer a joke.
Well, real talk, has that been the result of what happened during the defund the police movement? Has those in power tried to change what policing looked like? What was the term used? Reimagining policing.
Yeah.
Is that a part of it, where where police become more relatable today rather than fulfilling the function that they have been given?
Well, I think there's no doubt. I mean,
Okay.
the defund the police movement
Right.
served its purpose, which was to destroy the policing profession, which was to tear down the trust and respect of the community for the officers and for the officers of the community they serve. We drove a wedge in between the two entities, and we got them to start pointing fingers at one another. At the same time, we had people with political agendas that said, listen, if we take this defund the police mantra, we can utilize it to demonize the police, dehumanize them, strip away that human being behind the badge, make them the target of our ire, and then at the same time reallocate the funds that we've directed toward them toward pet projects and agenda-driven groups. And it's done nothing but to destabilize our communities. Listen, I've been a strong advocate of this. People say, well, yeah, but we need to have more funding for mental health services.
Right.
I've been one of the first ones to advocate strongly for that. Just recently, we issued another very strong message that we should not be sending our law enforcement officers to mental health runs that don't involve an allegation of a crime.
Yeah, I remember that.
That's not the role for us, right?
Yes, right.
But what we have done is we have, as communities, have said, these are things that we don't want to confront. These are things that we don't want to address. These are things that we don't want to see. So we'll just toss it into the laps of our law enforcement officers. People say, well, we need more funding for mental health. I don't disagree. But I'm not saying that you should be stripping that away from the entity that you have to have, like those referees, for your community to function in order to serve this other purpose, and at the same time destabilize the whole thing. What we have said is if you're saying you need to fund it, you need to fund it all.
Right.
And we've advocated and found ways to be able to do that. But Rev, we've got to start getting some serious discussions about the heart of the matter. And when we're talking about human violence, oftentimes criminal violence, that means we got to talk about the people.
Right. Right.
See, and you know this,
Right.
and you and I think, somewhat have a disagreement on this. And I get it. I don't think it's a disagreement. I just think it's a different approach. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. Is this issue of gun violence?
Right.
Violence with weapons, particularly guns, is catastrophic in our communities. Officers know that better than anyone.
Right,
We're averaging an officer shot in the line of duty in our nation every 21 hours now.
Right.
Every 21 hours. With that, we have officers who are dying in the line of duty every 52 hours. Not all of them being shot and killed.
Right.
But they're laying down their lives. So when people say, well, you don't understand violence and violence with guns, well, we understand it better than anyone.
Right.
We're confronting it day in and day out. However, what we know as officers is the weapon isn't the issue at hand. It's the heart that's behind that and the human hands that are behind that weapon. And so we've got to start having those discussions, because when we fall into the trap of just simply talking about the instrument, even if you eliminated every firearm in this nation, which is not going to happen, even if you did that, the violence is not going away. So then what do we do?
Well, the question becomes, and this is a good, I think probably where I stand on it is more so, how do we keep those weapons out of the hands of children and violent offenders?
Now you're talking a whole different thing.
Yes, yes.
And that's the part. This is why I stay so strong on this, because this is the discussion that needs to occur, but gets lost when we just simply focus on talking about the instrument.
Right.
And so, I mean, you watch it on social media.
Yeah.
When I say it's not gun violence, it's not knife violence, it's human violence. People come out from the woodwork, right? To criticize that, be critical of that, all those other things.
Right.
Well, the reason why is because it's like holding a mirror up to your community. Guns have been around in our nation since our nation was formed.
Right.
This isn't a pro-gun, anti-gun. It's just a facts matter kind of discussion.
Right.
So if we had all these weapons for decades upon decades, but we didn't see things like we're seeing with mass killings, right, and officers being shot every 21 hours, that's a new phenomenon.
Right.
What changed? It wasn't the weapons.
Right.
It was the heart.
Right.
And so when you talk about that, and it starts to bring you back around to discussions like, so why are juveniles getting greater access to weapons? How is that happening? Well, if they're juveniles, there are children, there's probably less supervision and adult supervision. Maybe weapons in the home that nobody is monitoring or keeping secured, or worse yet, families and parental structures that aren't existing, and therefore you have criminal entities, either individuals or groups such as gangs, that put the weapons into the hands of the juveniles.
Absolutely.
And that's the discussion people don't want to have.
No, and you're absolutely right. We don't, have those kind of discussions as to, how these kids are getting access to the gun. I was at one of the apartment complexes on the far east side last week, and my son was with me. So he wants to, hang with Dad a little bit more. So he's been hanging with Dad a little bit more. So I'm wondering if he's thinking
Becoming
about
a man.
Yeah. I'm following in Dad's footsteps. But as we were walking through the complex, I pointed out to my son as I was with a group of 10-point OGs. I said, look at those young men, and you could tell that in their pockets, the bulge in their pockets, you could see the gun and you could see the extended magazine. And I'm saying to myself, how old are these kids? They look young. And, I don't know if they were 17, 18, 19, 20, because sometimes
So let me ask you this question.
Yes.
You're seeing that. You're pointing that out to your son who's by your side.
Right.
How many of those young men with the guns had their dads by their side?
None. Yeah, none. Yeah, none.
Did your son, a juvenile who's not legally permitted to be carrying a handgun, a firearm like that, did he have a weapon on him?
No, he didn't.
See, I'm starting to see some kind of correlation here.
Well, it is. And what we say, and certainly my perspective on it, certainly I think you cannot discount the role of the family and the breakdown in the family.
I'll go one step further.
Yes.
I'll go one step further.
Okay.
the role of the father.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna get to that
Okay.
because I think in certain communities, I think that is much more prevalent
I see what you're saying.
than in other communities, and particularly, when you talk about urban violence, the role of the father. Most of these kids are growing up where, if there is a father, and the kids that tend to be the kids that are most at risk, either the father's not there or the father is there in their life, but they are a negative influence because they may be also involved in certain activities that their children then tend to follow in their footsteps.
Sure.
And I use that as an example. My own brother, his son tended to follow in his footsteps, which led to the same result.
Yeah.
The same result was both were killed. Tragic results. Yes. So that's what we are seeing. So for those of us who are doing this work on the ground, my question is, how does these kids, these young people, get access to these guns that are unlawful for them to have, and the kind of weapons that they have, Rick, that really concerns us too, and what they do with these weapons where, they talk about the switch. I don't know what that means. That shoots like a machine gun. I mean, that's what we're seeing.
Which we worked on to get outlawed.
Okay.
Over at the Indiana legislature this year.
Okay.
And that was successfully passed.
I thought I heard it was passed.
It's a mechanism that turns the semi-automatic gun, which means one bullet, one pull.
Okay.
Per pull, there's one bullet.
Okay.
Those devices turned those semi-automatic handguns into pulling the one trigger, and they basically effectively became an automatic firearm, a machine gun. And so we worked to get that done because here again, our officers are up against that same kind of weaponry. Right. Here's what I would say is, I think you got to talk about this as a big picture issue, right? The parental structure, parental supervision. I mean, as you said, you and I have known each other for 20 plus years now.
Right.
And I always point this out, not known each other, just known each other, but have worked and stood alongside one another in the streets. Right.
That's true.
Right?
Yes.
And we also saw things and did things that worked.
Right. Absolutely.
We saw outcomes that came that were very positive from very intentional steps that we were taking in our defined roles.
Right. Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
When we stood together shoulder to shoulder in the middle of the street or on a street corner, running different specific projects that we were working on to preserve the law, restore order, lower crime, increase quality of life in neighborhoods. When we did that in our specific roles. I didn't stand there and try to act like a reverend.
Right. And
you didn't stand there and try to act like the lieutenant or the officer of the day.
Right.
We stood in our defined roles together and made clear that there was no division or daylight in between us.
Right.
That made the difference.
That's true.
And I would suggest that's what we got to get back to. And you talked about officers feel like they're social workers. They need to be problem solvers. They don't need to be the social worker. They don't need to be the mental health provider. They don't need to be the emergency medical technician or paramedic. They need to be the law enforcement officer, and they need all those other resources available to them. Listen, I'm huge on collaborative work.
Right.
And people fulfilling their defined roles in a collaborative nature that provides this wide-ranging, resource-available, resource-driven approach. We've gotten away from that because the folks in other defined roles have pulled back. Mental health, I'll give you some quick examples. We launched what's called the MCAT teams, which are mental health crisis teams that are multidisciplinary. They started off with 3 representatives on that team, a law enforcement officer, an emergency medical personnel, a paramedic from IEMS, and a clinician, right? We ran that project starting back in 2018 for a series of months, and within 18 months, one of the 3 entities pulled out of the arrangement. Do you know who that was?
Who?
It was the Emergency Medical Services. There's an Indy Star article that actually notes this and showed that over 18 months, the reason why they pulled out, do you know what it was?
What was it?
Money, Rev.
Okay.
Money.
Okay.
See, this gets to my point. IEMS services are revenue-generated entities.
Right.
If an ambulance comes out and they provide medical treatment to you and they take you to the hospital, what's the first thing they give you?
Yeah.
They give you a bill.
Yeah, you
right?
get a bill, yeah.
Your police officers don't do that.
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
That's true.
And so IEMS pulled out of it because they said the structure did not fit their monetary business model.
Okay.
And over
okay.
18 months, they lost over $600,000.
Wow.
Now, they say loss. I think what they meant is they didn't bring it in.
They didn't bring it in.
Right?
Yeah.
And so they pulled out of the arrangement.
Right.
Well, that's crazy.
Right. Absolutely.
And so here again, what did we do? We didn't fix that.
Right.
We didn't say, hey, this is the structure that we've created and you need to be in it. No, we said, okay, we'll just dump that further into the laps of the law enforcement officers.
So, but the question that I have, and you know, do we have enough officers now on the street?
No.
Because, okay, yeah, so let's talk about that, because I just seen a story 2 weeks ago about in Washington, D.C., they have the lowest number of police officers in the last 50 years. So if we don't have enough police on the streets of our cities, then is that not a public safety issue if there's not enough officers to go around? And I say that, you know, sometimes I listen to my radio, and there may not be any more cars available in a particular district.
That's correct. And they have to call for help from other districts.
Yes.
And when they call those officers from other districts to come to their district,
right.
What did they do to that other district?
Right, absolutely.
They left it short. Right. So here's what I always say. In Indianapolis, we're 250 officers short right now.
Okay.
We are funded for 1,850 officers, and I thank God for that.
Right.
Because it was a long fight to get to that point.
Right.
However, we don't have the officers to fill those spots. So we're funded for 1,850. We're down to 1,600. And quite honestly, here's the real deep, dark secret, is that we're actually really now close to 1,500 officers.
That's what I thought.
Which is what we were at in the Ballard administration when we were bare bones and suffering because of it.
Okay.
So the funding is there. Right. So again, we had to fight and combat and confront the whole defunding mantra.
Right.
The funding is there, but the bodies are not there.
Okay.
So I asked this question: does that have an impact on the safety of the city? Well, let me ask you this: if I came to you today and told you that you were down or short 250 firefighters, would people say that was good? They would say that'd be concerning.
No, it'd be concerning.
What if I said 250 paramedics, 250 emergency room doctors? Right. But for some reason, we just kind of gloss over being 250 officers short. Why? Because the more you dump on the officer, they'll just take more on. That's the nature of the folks that we have that do those jobs. But it's not right. It's not fair to the citizens, not just the residents of our city, but the visitors to our city. And it's darn sure not fair to our schools, our youth, and our juveniles that are in the community who are trying to find their way, especially if they don't have a family structure to lean upon. And so we've got to start confronting that.
Well, let me ask you this. If you're not bringing in enough recruits every year and you continue to have officers who retire, who leave the department, take some other job with another police department, what are those numbers going to look like 5 years from now and maybe 10 years from now if you're not keeping up as far as recruiting?
Well, I just got back from Washington, D.C.
Okay.
Just a week and a half ago, I think it was. I was out there for a national discussion via the Department of Justice.
Okay.
Alongside the COPS office under the Department of Justice. And in that, the discussion was on this very issue. Now, they called it a recruitment and retention crisis.
Okay.
You'll note that here in Indianapolis, I'm consistent in saying we don't have a recruitment crisis. We have a retention crisis.
Okay.
You first have to retain the officers you have before you can even start to recruit new officers.
Okay.
I always say this. Are you going to buy a ticket to a sinking boat?
No.
To a sinking ship?
No.
So how do you get people to come and want to work for your agency if more officers are leaving the agency than you can bring in the door?
Okay.
They're not going to do that. So first you have to improve morale, increase support for the officers that you have, to incentivize them to stay, because we need them critically,
right.
to incentivize them to stay, to feel like they matter, to feel like they have value to the community. It's no different than any other organization. Once you start doing that, morale goes up. When morale goes up, then people want to be a part of that.
Okay.
The military has figured that out, right? When they do their recruitment strategies and do retention bonuses and incentives and all those other things. We have got to get a handle on this, because what we're finding is we have more officers walking out the door than we're able to bring in.
Right.
At the same time, many of those officers aren't just leaving the profession and retiring. We've had that for many years.
Okay.
Now they're leaving to go to other agencies, because agencies throughout the state of Indiana, they have upped their game.
Okay.
Indiana State Police in this legislative session just got passed in the budget across-the-board pay raises for state troopers. You're a state police chaplain.
Right.
State troopers just got a 30 to 50% pay raise across the board. They will have mid-tenured troopers making more than our chiefs at the IMPD.
Wow.
That's the chiefs. So how do we retain officers when they can go and make more money, probably have higher morale, feel more support? How do we compete with that? Well, you've got to compete.
Right.
And so our residents need to be saying to our elected officials, you got to get a handle on this. You got to get your hands around it. And listen, we're funded at 1,850 officers, but that isn't what we really need. Rick Height, past chief of police here, he was always saying this: we have 1,500 officers doing the work of 3,000. He's absolutely correct in that. Now, 3,000 is pie in the sky. I don't think we could ever get there.
Right.
But we should definitely have more than 1,850. But we can't even hit that number right now.
Well, this is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison, and my special guest is Rick Snyder, president of the local F.O.P. 86, as we talk about a variety of things that we're talking about today. My question is the mood of the country right now. Has the mood of the country changed from what happened with the George Floyd incident, Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky? Certainly the incident in Memphis did not help when it comes to how people view policing today. And if that doesn't change, how do we recruit enough officers to want to go into the profession? Go into the profession.
Yeah, well, you won't be able to if we don't improve the support for the profession.
Okay.
People aren't going to go and join that. And if we stay where they can find other jobs,
right.
I mean, most people would say, who on earth would go and do that right now?
Right.
And it's not just the support, it's the dangers that our officers are facing, right?
Absolutely.
They're walking around literally with targets on their backs. And here again, I just asked the same thing. If I asked emergency room doctors, if I told them, hey, every 25 hours, one of you as one emergency room doctor in this country is going to be shot doing your job, how many would come back to work the next day? If I said that to firefighters, if I said that to paramedics, if I said that to school teachers, they wouldn't do it.
Right.
But that is what's happening in this profession. And then we say, how do we get people into these jobs? Well, it's got to be something more. There's got to be something deep down inside them that is willing to put others above themselves and get them into those roles. You asked, has the mood changed in our country? I think somewhat people are finally starting to see what the outcomes are of demonizing and demoralizing our police.
Okay.
And it isn't just that, but we've literally driven our police from things. Don't forget, we're seeing mass killings in our schools.
Right.
Well, people forget that just 2-3 years ago, we had people openly advocating for removing armed, professionally trained law enforcement officers from our schools.
I remember that conversation. I remember that being said. Yes. Right.
And now people are clamoring of how do we get armed officers into our schools?
Right.
Well,
absolutely.
Step one could have been leave them there, and then build upon that. Now, I just think that what we've got, that's just one example. But as people think this pendulum is swinging back the other way, the only thing that I would say is that many of the politically driven, agenda-driven groups, operatives, they haven't gone away, and they're just waiting for the next opportunity to leverage that. I talk about it. I'm unabashed about talking. That kind of stuff is wicked, man.
Right.
Now, if there's something, and there's plenty of examples where law enforcement is wrong. You've heard me say, I'll immediately call it out. We did in George Floyd. We did after Memphis. We've done it even locally. But here is the thing with that. We got to stop painting with a broad brush on everybody. I watch when we have an officer, Breanne Leath, shot and killed in April of 2020, a month before George Floyd. Right. Now, the folks that she was working alongside of after George Floyd, everybody was calling all of them corrupt, evil, terrible people. But when an officer is killed, then we call him a hero. Well, what changed there? Right. It's the same person. It's the same heart that was serving their community. So I just always encourage people when we talk about like be like Bree. I use her as an example because people really connect with her. But many of our officers, Officer David Moore, Officer Jake Laird, these officers who are known for their death, we got to remember and lift them up for their lives when they're serving our communities. So I think if we could change some of that perception that we have many Breanne Lees, many David Moores that are serving every day faithfully, we need to lift them up and give them that support and say, we love you for what you do day in and day out, not just for that single act of heroism, but for the heroic work you do every day. So
Rick, how do we move forward then? I'm not just concerned about Indianapolis. I'm concerned nationally, but certainly I see what's happening here, in Indianapolis, and I get opportunities to talk with officers, and since I'm a pastor and a chaplain, and I'm on the streets, some of them trust me enough to have real conversations with me, and I feel their pain and their concerns that they have, and I'm one of the black leaders that is trying to bridge the gap, between real talk, the black community and law enforcement, and this mistrust. I think it does get exaggerated some because I think many of the residents in the neighborhood certainly want safe neighborhoods, and certainly they want police officers patrolling in areas where we are having problems, in the city. But yet, we're working to try to bridge that gap in the midst of what happened. And I'll probably go back. I would go back even before George Floyd. I would go back to Michael Brown and Ferguson. That's when I really started to see it change, and it gradually, increased and got worse.
Yeah, well, let me change gears a little bit.
Okay.
And rightfully so. I'm always asked from a law enforcement perspective. Right. But as you know, I'm a believer before I'm an officer.
You are.
And I also serve as a chaplain.
Right.
And I know the need for spiritual wellness amongst our law enforcement profession. So I just say all of that to just simply say, understand where in my heart I'm coming from. And this. But Chief Taylor was onto something. Our police officers can't make this change. They can't do this. Now, we haven't just driven law enforcement officers out of the equation, but Rev, we've driven our men and women of God out of the equation.
Absolutely.
We've driven our faith leaders out of the equation. Quite frankly, we've driven many of our preachers out of the pulpit. Right.
Absolutely.
Now, I say that looking at you with people who tried to do that to you.
Right. Absolutely.
See, people think we forgot about that. I didn't forget about that.
Yes, absolutely.
You know how much I rose up with those things, right? Anger, a righteous anger. And here's why. Because we've got to get back to talking about law, righteousness, things like family, and things like community in our neighborhoods. People don't want to talk about that anymore. No. I was sitting here looking at my phone because I looked up and found the latest stat is that 1 in 4 children live without a biological step or adoptive father in the home. 25% of our youth in the United States of America have no father in the home.
Yeah, that's true.
This is what this says. That's enough children to fill New York City twice or Los Angeles 4 times over.
Wow.
Now think about that.
Yeah,
and you're going to tell me we're going to be successful with that?
Right.
But we have organizations that are trying to deconstruct the family unit.
Right.
We better start talking about that.
Right.
And we need women and men of God to stand up and boldly say, that is the wrong way to go, folks.
Right.
And there's a thing called the Word of God that actually tells us that we've got bad outcomes coming our way when we do that.
Right. Absolutely.
If you'll allow me as a man of God.
Go ahead.
Romans 1:21, for although they knew God, they did not honor him. They did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God.
Right.
And what does God tell us will happen? He will turn our cities, our communities, our families over to a depraved mind to do what they ought not do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
take a good look around.
That reprobate mind. Yeah,
that's
true.
Exactly
that's
right.
True. That's true.
So here's the thing with that.
Right.
Where are the women and men of God coming out of the 4 corners of the church and the houses of worship to point our cities, our families, our children back to God and his ways? See, that ain't popular to talk about anymore.
Right.
But I would suggest to you, because people have allowed that to be driven out of the equation, we're bearing the consequences.
Well, we are because sadly, it's because it's been so politicized. It's been so politicized. Right. You know, so that the church community
we crossed streams. We didn't stay in our lanes.
We didn't. Where the church has to be the prophetic voice of God.
There you go.
And we can never compromise that, but we have for political reasons. You know, and we do see, I think, the tragic results of that in our larger society. So that's why we have all these societal issues that at the root of them are spiritual issues.
There you go.
Yes.
Matters of the heart.
Yes.
Heart issues.
Right. Absolutely.
We're in a spiritual battle here, Rev.
That's right.
And we're trying to find all these other ways to talk about it. Right. You know, and we talk about mental health, mental wellness. There are true medicalogical, mental challenges that folks face, mental illness.
Right.
But there are far more opportunities where we find it's truly a spiritual issue that has gone on. Right.
Absolutely.
And then what did I just read?
Right.
God turns them over to a reprobate mind.
That's right. That's
to
true.
do those things that they ought not do. And here we are. When we say, and here's the danger with this.
Right.
People take it to the extreme and they say, well, if somebody's suffering from mental health, we really can't hold them accountable for criminal bad acts they do. Wrong.
Right.
Wrong. You still have to hold them accountable. If somebody is suffering from spiritual wellness, spiritual blindness, you still have to hold them accountable. Right?
Right.
But in 2019, I stood with you on the corner and I said that we no longer want to talk about this in our community.
No. We don't. And that's part of, and I think that's part of the problem. And I think that's the role that the church should be playing. That's the role that the church should be playing in addressing that aspect of what we're seeing today that is leading to so much crime and violence in our community, and beginning to talk about the issue of the family. And the church ought to play a role in being a part of the extended family, you know, and for a young man who does not have a father or a positive role model in his life, I think the church ought to play a role in being that. Like I felt like what happened with me when I was younger. Had a great dad, grandfather, positive role models in my life, but I can think of so many other men, you know, that influenced my life in a positive way. Man. Yeah, you know, and I don't see that at the same level that I did when I was growing up.
Well, you know, as you grow up as a young man, there are all those things you're going to draw down from your father, but there are also times in your life where you don't want to hear it from your dad. Yeah, right.
That's right.
That's where you need to be surrounded by other godly men who can point you point you back to your dad, but also onto that path. Right. And that's just the point. Where have all the men gone? Right.
That's true.
And you know, we say, well, this shouldn't just be about men. Well, it's not. It used to be, it was left on the mama in the family, the mom. Well, we've driven the mom out of the family.
Right. But for the preacher, I would say, for those who, it's the spiritual order in which God ordained thing. God, the man, the woman, and the children. God the Father, the wife, and the children. That is the divine order that God established. So each of them have an important role that they play.
And when the vast majority of our victims and our suspects are young men,
yes,
probably a good place to start and have these discussions.
Yeah, that's true.
But like you said, nobody's wanting to have them. I just say to you, I mean, and I appreciate this conversation.
Right.
I would welcome more conversations like this, because I ask myself, when was the last time, quite frankly, outside of you, that I've seen a local faith leader on the 6 o'clock news, not a podcast, not just in the church, but on the news, talking and lifting up the name of God.
Right. Amen.
And I'm ashamed to say that.
Yeah.
But when was that?
Yeah.
You know, and when you sit back and reflect upon that, and I got to tell you, it's not because the news won't play it.
Right.
I've tested those waters, right? They play it.
Yeah, that's right.
And, you know, we had the one interview where I held up the Bible and said, it's time to contend for the faith.
That's right.
And I thought that news organization would be overwhelmed with negative phone calls. Get that junk off my TV. It was the opposite. Not one negative phone call. Overwhelmed by calls, all positive, saying we need more of that.
Right.
Well, that's my challenge that I issue to our faith leaders. We need to hear more of the words of God preached from the pulpit in the public than about political parties.
Amen. Thank you so much, Rick, for joining me today on Real Talk. And the next time we get together, we got to talk more on that spiritual part of it.
Let's get other faith leaders in here. Let's have those discussions.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that. Tell you what. I'm Reverend Charles Harrison, and this has been Real Talk. Join me next time as I bring more real talk about the real issues that affect our community here in Indianapolis and across the country. Be sure to subscribe and to follow this podcast, Reverend Charles Harrison, Reverend Terry Webster Sr., and share it on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I pray that you have a blessed and awesome day.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast.
And be sure to check out other great podcasts on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Online now at allindianapodcast.com.